Natalie looked at her husband and couldn't understand when he had become like this. Or maybe he had always been this way, and she just hadn't noticed before. Either way, it didn't matter now. Dan, if we're buying an apartment, we should split it equally. Otherwise, I'm taking my part of the money back. You have to agree. It's not right. We saved up for this apartment together, sold my grandmother's place, and I've invested more money. But for some reason, we should register it only in your name. Dan impatiently shrugged. You're so mercenary. What's the difference whose name it's in? We're a family, and keeping track of who invested what is just ridiculous. I'll repeat, we're a family. Fine. If there's no difference, then why is it in your name? Natalie asked. Dan looked at her confused. What difference does it make? I just want it that way. I'm the head of the house. The man is the head. Dan was getting upset. He didn't understand what was happening. Natalie had always agreed with everything he said. He hadn't been prepared for this. He was sure she would agree this time too. Dan, stop. In our country, equality has existed for a long time. Either we register the apartment in both our names, or we don't register it at all. He didn't finish his argument, but his final point was, but it's more expensive. You know we'll need to save for a while. Nothing to worry about, he continued. You won't drink beer in the evenings for a month. She almost couldn't believe he was saying that. 10 years of silence and agreement, and now this. It felt like her friend Laura had been teaching her how to stand up for herself. Dan immediately disliked Laura. In fact, Laura couldn't stand him either. He felt like she was scanning him with her eyes, and whenever she was around, he quickly found a reason to leave. Dan didn't know what to do. He really wanted that big apartment, but even more, he wanted to be its sole owner. But maybe he would come up with something later. The most important thing was to get Natalie back to her place. God forbid she starts asking where he's been in the evenings and why his salary has decreased. It wasn't that his salary had decreased. It was just that expenses had gone up after he started dating Laura. But Natalie didn't need to know that. She was content with their home, always clean, clothes ironed, fresh and varied food. When she needed him, her head never hurt, but everything felt dull and grey to her now. Natalie was conflicted. She never thought this would happen, but now she couldn't ignore it. She even noticed that Dan came home at night, though he worked until 6. She also saw how distant he'd become and how he thought of her as a fool. She used to think of Dan as her husband, someone they'd always be together. But recently she began to wonder, what if he leaves me for someone else? The thought hurt, and of course she confided in her friend Laura. If that happens, how will I live? Natalie asked. Laura scoffed. Live? You're existing now, not living. You've turned into his doormat. He's got you wrapped around his finger. When was the last time he gave you flowers? Oh, wait. Flowers are an unnecessary expense. You know we're saving up for a new apartment. Flowers are expenses, but dinners like at a restaurant for him are just nitrates. Natalie, what are you thinking? Your Dan only loves himself and will never make any sacrifices for you. You're working 2 jobs, earning 3 times more than him, and you still think you owe him something. Where did you lose yourself? Think about the guys who used to chase you. Remember Paul? He was something. But after you married Dan, it was like you vanished. Enough already. I came to you for advice and you... Natalie started, but Laura interrupted. What do you think I care about giving advice? I'm the one telling you, reform your husband. Show him that you have rights, not just duties in this family. If you don't, he'll just toss you out of that new apartment. Laura had a point. Natalie had never really thought about her own rights in their relationship. She had been swept up by her role as a supportive wife, but now things were changing. She heard Dan come home late one night, looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m, but she didn't get up. She used to jump up to make him dinner, but this time she just turned her back to the wall. The apartment was nice, sunny with large windows. Dan walked around it looking pleased, then stopped at the window. Well, I did it, didn't I? We got this place. You wouldn't have thought of it on your own. Natalie almost smiled, but then he saw it. What's so funny? You think you could have bought this place alone? It hurt, but she stayed silent. She still couldn't get over how she had kept it together during the apartment purchase. The important thing was that Dan's dream had come true, and now he would be more interested in staying at home rather than anywhere else. It had been this way for a whole year. Natalie even brought up the idea of having a child again, but her husband made big eyes. Natalie, what do you mean, a child? Don't talk to me about age and women giving birth late. You see, we've practically got empty walls here. Everything needs to be bought and furnished. She only sighed. 2 years had passed, and the apartment was, of course, unrecognizable. Natalie took any side jobs just to buy everything they needed as quickly as possible. But Dan started disappearing again. Now, he would come home in the mornings. She understood that something was coming that would completely change her life. And that event didn't take long to arrive. One evening after dinner, he leaned back at the table and said, "I'm leaving you, Natalie. I'm tired of someone like you. Actually, I'm not leaving, but I want you to move out. I'll be getting a younger wife soon and I need more space. You probably don't care where you live, right? Alone, maybe." It was like she was already prepared for it. Not a single muscle moved on Natalie's face. "Well, it's your right, of course. I'm not going to force you to stay, but I'm not leaving. This is my apartment, so I'll be living here." Dan's eyes widened at such audacity. "Actually, half of this apartment is mine according to the documents, so, live here if you want or move out. You should obey your husband, though. The last thing I need is to be running around looking for a place to live." Natalie stood up. "No more talking about this, Dan. The conversation is over. I'll pack your things and leave them on the couch. I hope you can pack them yourself." She walked out, leaving him sitting there with his mouth open. He thought about how his girlfriend would react to this turn of events and rushed after Natalie. "How dare you? You still have no one, and you won't. We need a place to live." Natalie shrugged. "Live where you want. I'm not stopping you." Dan stomped his foot. "You'll regret this, and I promise you that. I'll sell my half of the apartment to some foreigner, and then you'll sing a different tune." Natalie was sure he was just trying to scare her, though doubt lingered in her mind. The divorce went according to the best traditions of cinematic drama. Dan even decided to divide the dishes, and all of this came with claims and insults. His new girlfriend also expressed her dissatisfaction, and Natalie had to listen to it because she had been everywhere with Dan. When it was finally over, Natalie took a deep breath. But as it turned out, not for long. A couple of months later, Dan showed up. "Well, have you decided to move out yet?" "No, why should I decide? It's your problem. But I found a buyer for my half, and tomorrow I'm selling." "Good luck." He ran out the door. Natalie sat down in a chair. "God, what did I do to deserve this? Why is Dan, the one I lived with for so many years, treating me this way? Even during the divorce, I didn't try to make things difficult for him." 3 days later, Natalie opened the door to her apartment and realized someone was inside. She immediately felt sick. Dan had kept his promise. In the kitchen, something was cooking. Natalie caught the smell of frying meat. She took a few steps forward and saw a tall, strong, dark-haired man standing with his back to her. He was thoughtfully staring at the frying pan and holding a salt shaker in his hands. The table was set for 2 people, which led Natalie to believe he was expecting company. But why was her cookware being used? Why was her table set? "Hello," she said, full of resolve, ready to speak her mind to this unexpected guest. The man jumped, dropped the salt, quickly picked it up and turned toward her. "Good evening. I'm sorry. I decided to cook a little and set the table to get to know you and talk." "So, you're doing this for me?" The man finally smiled. "Yes. Dan told me you're not very welcoming." Natalie froze, staring at the man for a long time. She didn't say anything, and he started to get nervous, looking himself over. "Is something wrong?" "Don't worry, I work on shifts. I don't like visiting my mother every month. My sister is there with her child, so I'm away for 3 months at a time." "Pasha," he said and stopped, watching her. Then he stepped closer and gasped, "No way. I never would have recognized you." She smiled bitterly. "Have I really changed that much?" He thought for a moment and shook his head. "No, no. You haven't aged. Your eyes. It's like they've become indifferent." And that was when Natalie couldn't hold it anymore. She just stood there and started crying. Pasha sat her down on the couch, gave her some water, and hugged her. "What's wrong? You've never cried before. All the girls used to cry, but not you." She kept talking while Pasha arranged the meat, poured wine, and only when the bottle was almost empty did she fall silent. Pasha sat quietly for a while, then said, "So, from now on, you need to forget everything that happened before. You're going to have a completely different life now." He suddenly paused. "Hey, when's your vacation?" Natalie shrugged. "I haven't had a vacation in about 5 years. Well, tomorrow morning you're going to write a request, and we're going to go on vacation." "Vacation? Where?" "We'll decide that later. The important thing is, while you're at work, I'll buy everything we need. In a week, you'll be tan and have that sparkle in your eyes." Angela nudged Dan. "Look at that coat. Oh my God, I really want one like that." Dan grimaced. Angela had such expensive tastes that the money from selling half the apartment had vanished like smoke. He couldn't talk about it right away because it would start the same old argument. "But you're a man." He had already seen the price of that coat, though it was a darker color. "Please." "That's the latest luxury." At that moment the woman turned to her companion and said something with a smile. He tilted his head, then gently took her by the elbow and they turned to walk away. Dan froze. Angela went silent. The woman was pregnant. And it was Natalie. She recognized her ex-husband. The person Dan was selling half the apartment to recognized him too and immediately stood between the wife and Dan. Dan made an unpleasant face. "You turned out to be smarter than I thought. You decided to sleep with the tenant to keep the apartment, huh?" He didn't finish, because a powerful punch knocked him down. Pasha leaned over him. "Never, ever look at my wife again. And if you try to say anything else, I'll snap your neck. Got it?" Dan nodded rapidly. Pasha straightened up, took the scared Natalie by the elbow again, and they headed for the exit. Dan gathered himself and turned to Angela. "Did you see that? You saw it, right? You're going to be a witness. I'll make sure they both end up in jail." Angela gave him a strange look, then replied, "That's something you'll have to handle without me. You're not a man, worse than a woman, and as I understand, you've got no money left, so you're of no interest to me anymore. What else could you possibly offer me?" Angela stepped over his legs and headed toward the exit. Dan extended his hand to her, but then lowered it and sat silently on the floor. If you liked the story, I really hope you'll support me with a thumbs up. Thank you, and all the best.